Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
Today's guest has been described as the best singer-songwriter you've never heard of yet. My guest currently resides in Washington, D.C. His musical journey stems back to his school days, where he met his future and fellow bandmates. In the summer of 2004, they formed Lionize and would perform heavily around the Maryland, D.C. and Virginia areas. Since the recording of their debut album, Danger My Dear, they've gone on to record and release 7 albums, including the acclaimed recordings, Space Pope and the Glass Machine and Nuclear Soul. Lionize have toured with Steel Pulse, the Wailers, Yellowman, Lee Scratch Perry, and have a close affiliation with the band Clutch, having opened for them, collaborated musically, and recorded on their record label. My guest released his first solo album this year. The album is called Metaphysical Change and was masterminded during the global pandemic. Stranded 1,000 miles away from his family, he's produced a country, blues and rock-infused album that really is the real deal. Today I talked to Nate Bergman. We discussed Nate's musical roots and influences, his time in Lionize, musical collaborations, and of course, his solo album. A very warm welcome, Nate. Thanks for joining me today on Your Take.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Good to see you, and we'll speak in depth about your musical journey, of course, for several years in the band Lionize, and of course, now your solo endeavors. But I wanted to go back, if possible, and go back to the very foundations and find out about your upbringing and start at the very beginning.
Sure.
You currently reside in Washington, D.C., but can you tell us where you were born? And can you tell us about your childhood and just describe your Jewish roots?
Sure. I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is a suburb of D.C., and almost a city suburb. It's kind of a city within itself. So DC is the kind of the center where everything happens, and the suburb is, 1 or 2 miles outside of the city. So I grew up in a pretty urban area. And yeah, I grew up to Jewish parents. On my dad's side, they're all from Montreal. So they're Canadian. My dad's Canadian, and they ended up in Montreal after leaving Nazi Germany in 1939. And my mother's parents are second generation from Lithuania and Ukraine. So they ended up in America in first Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, and then Washington, D.C. So my parents met here.
If you don't mind, I want to pick up on family life. And can you tell us about your parents, what they did for a living? Do you have siblings? And do you come from a musical family? And I also wanted to ask you what kind of music was being played in the household growing up, and what music inspired you to want to pursue a career as a musician?
I got really lucky. Well, first off, I'm an only child, no siblings. So obviously, there goes your, stereotypical need for attention. And now that's my whole career, I guess, is pursuing that feeling of, wanting attention from people. But my parents, I really got lucky. They're super fucking cool. And they both had incredible taste in music, and there was always music in the house from a very young age. So my mom was they had a huge record collection. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of vinyls. And my mom was very much into Motown and folk music. So we had Sam Cooke, The Temptations, Stevie Wonder, Joni Mitchell, Joan Baez, the Shirelles. I mean, that entire spectrum of soul music and Motown and from the girl group post doo-wop era, all the way to like that side of American folk music in the 60s. And then my dad was really my earliest memories as a kid were driving to my dad owned a seafood market, a store, and my earliest memories with my dad are driving in his blue pickup truck, listening to Creedence Clearwater going to work with him. So my dad was super into classic rock, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, and then he kind of also dabbled in some stuff that was really only popular in Canada before it got to the US, like Bob Marley and the Wailers kind of broke over there first. And so Uprising was like a big record in our house growing up, and just always a real appreciation for music, but no musicians in the family except one kind of distant cousin on my mom's father's side is a trumpet player. But other than that, really no musicians.
Lots of different musical influences. You mentioned Black American music, you mentioned Motown and classic rock bands from US and the UK as well.
Mm-hmm.
I want to move on from the influences and come on to schooling. Where did you go to school, and what are your memories from that period? And was music taught at school? And which subjects would you say you excelled in? And did you go on to further education?
I excelled. So I went to public school, Montgomery County, Maryland public school system. And I feel also exceptionally lucky because the elementary, middle school, and high school I went to were majority Black. And I was introduced to like so much popular American Black music and Black culture from a young age. So for me, like there's a genre of music very specific to DC called go-go music, which is a mixture of funk and soul and Latin percussion, and it only really exists in DC. And my elementary music school teacher, so I never formally took music classes, but growing up in the public school system, you have music class, like a general music education. And at Glen Allen Elementary, my music teacher, I vividly remember his name is Mr. Vernon, an incredible musician and obsessed with Prince. So at the age of maybe 8 or 9, I was introduced to Prince. You know what I mean? Like really, he would draw his cloud guitar and the yellow swirl guitar on the chalkboard and play Prince's music for us in class, which I thought was really forward thinking for a music teacher. And I remember him always teaching us that essentially that like rock and roll, although in America was whitewashed, it had like come from Black culture. So like to understand the roots of rock and roll, you have to understand like Prince, and then you have to go back and look at Sam Cooke and Otis Redding, and then you have to look at Little Richard, really. And then of course, obviously that music went to England and morphed into a much more advanced version of rock and roll, and then kind of came back, and then that's where you get Prince, your guys like Prince and Living Color and the Bad Brains and stuff. So yeah, I mean, my growing up in the area I grew up in in retrospect now thinking about it, is a huge influence on my entire musical vocabulary.
I want to keep on the subject of high school and a key moment in your life, and that was meeting what would become your fellow bandmates at high school. Yeah. Can you recall how you all met and what united you all, and what were their musical influences, and how did you officially become or eventually become Lionize?
I don't really remember specifically how we individually met. I know that Chris and I went to the same high school, and Hank went to another high school, and we kind of knew each other through people that were into music. But Chris was a really advanced like jazz musician, and studying jazz, and basically got into Juilliard but couldn't really afford it essentially, or didn't want to go, something along those lines. And um we I think really what brought us together was a mutual um avoidance, wanting to not go to college and to not have a real job. And essentially I kind of started out playing some. I was lifeguarding at the time at swimming pools over the summer, after I graduated senior year, and this kid Ben Leck was throwing a massive party and said, "Hey, do you know any bands that would play my party?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. I'm in a band. I mean, I wasn't at the time. I just was like, I had been playing kicking around some songs on the guitar, and I was like, I'll get a band together for you." So some iteration of that happened. The party got busted up by the cops. A couple weeks later, my other friend Dean says, "Hey, I'm gonna have a party, and I want your band to play." And that was really the first iteration of what Lionize was a band that was playing people's house parties. And then word kind of started to spread through our mutual friends, and we played some fraternities, and we played some other house parties, and that kind of grew into playing bars at University of Maryland, big, massive college campus, I think 25,000 kids. And we started playing bars and small venues, and then started kind of traveling 2 hours from home to do the same thing in different college towns. And then it just kind of spread. So really that's the origin story, is that we were trying to avoid having real jobs, and it sort of turned into a 16-year adventure.
The origins narrative comes on nicely to my next question, because the band started performing live around 2004 around Maryland, DC, and Virginia areas, and as you said, playing bars and local venues. But
we took it real seriously in 2004 was when we really started taking it seriously. But we had started playing around 2001. We had really kicked around the idea of like playing people's parties and maybe making it a thing.
sure, I was going to ask you, how would you describe the musical scene around that time, and how do you look back at those early experiences, and what do you think the band learned musically during those kind of very early years?
There's a, in the if you're familiar with the show, the television show on HBO, The Sopranos, and the first episode of the pilot of season 1, and Tony's talking to his therapist, and he says, I have this feeling, things are good, but I have this feeling like that we got in right as things were, stopped being good. And that's not the exact quote, but basically I feel DC had such a rich rock and punk history of a music scene. And by the time we got into it, it was done. You know what I mean? It was mostly college shows, and mostly it was kind of at the height of like Dave Matthews Band and stuff like that. So that's really what people were kind of doing. And the punk stuff, Fugazi had already stopped playing shows, and just the biggest band that stayed around, that stayed in the area, was Clutch. And now, I mean, they're massive, but at that time, to us, they were the scene, in terms of like, there was a scene that kind of had built around that heavy rock sound and the stoner doom punk thing. Really, they were the height. They were the biggest band. And there was some smaller bands in that nucleus, and then that for us, that was really like, that was it. You know, the famous like house shows and St. Stephen's Church shows and the old 930 Club was gone. So we got in, and you know, and that's not like, that's kind of a mirror of the entire industry, really. I mean, in 2004, that's 4 years after file sharing exploded everything. Bands were getting record deals, but there wasn't a real scene. New York had a great scene, and LA had a great scene, and Jersey had an incredible scene for punk and emo, but for kind of weird experimental rock mixed with dub reggae, there wasn't a whole lot going on for that. And that was everything that was happening in that world was on the West Coast. And we felt very disconnected from that. We felt, I mean, there were a lot of American bands like Slightly Stupid, you know, Sublime had just kind of ended with Brad's death, and Slightly Stupid and Pepper and all these bands were becoming massive from the West Coast. And we never felt like we were part of that surf culture. We felt closer to like, oh, we're like, you know, we love Clutch and we love the Bad Brains and we love Steel Pulse. So we want to make a band that kind of sounds like that. So there wasn't a scene for us, actually. Even if it existed, we probably wouldn't have been accepted into it. So
You mentioned Steel Pulse, and my next question relates to them and your close affiliation with them. But what are your memories of opening for them back in 2005? And can you discuss how the bands have formed a long-term friendship? And can you also share your love of reggae music? And
sure.
And where does that come from, Nathan?
Well, I can only really say about our relationship with Steel Pulse is that I think we annoyed them into being our friends. Essentially, we fell in love with the band, and their sound engineer at the time, this guy, Derek Parker, who's an incredible sound engineer. I knew him. So it's kind of chicken and the egg. A cousin of mine, whose name was Gary Himmelfarb, aka he was known in the industry as Dr. Dread. He owned a reggae label in DC that was called Ross Records, Real Authentic Sound. And I grew up spending my summers there, like working at the record label and helping him out and learning about the music business and really being exposed to like a lot of reggae in my teenage years. And so I knew a guy who used to work at the label, this guy, Derek Parker, who was Steel Pulse's sound engineer. And I don't know, really, I think that's how he had the connections, because he worked at this label was the first reggae label in America to bring in Steel Pulse, Israel Vibration, Black Uhuru, Bunny Wailer. You know, they were the first American reggae record label. And this was, I think the label started in the 70s, the late 70s, early 80s. So like, I was kind of introduced to this thing that was at the forefront of all this reggae music that was beyond Bob Marley and beyond, you know, UB40 and stuff. It was like real, not underground, but like reggae for reggae people, you know, reggae that even a lot of just people in the UK and people in Jamaica knew. So I bugged Derek for 2 years, probably. Hey man, please we really want to open for Steel Pulse. It's like they're our favorite band, and I think it'd be cool. And we have a sound that's really influenced by them, and I think it would go over really well. So finally we did in 2005. I think we opened for them at the Record Theater. And ever since then, members of the band in different variations have been incredibly supportive and mentoring to us. And I don't know why, because we truly were so fucking annoying. And I can't think, I think really what they saw was a band that was young and really hungry and eager to work hard. And they taught us all about touring. I mean, the two bands that we learned the most from for sure our only mentors ever. And I know this sounds crazy because when you think about it, now that I'm saying it out loud, it's so crazy. But our two mentors in the music industry were Clutch and Steel Pulse, which is like, to me, so mind boggling. Most bands don't get any mentors. And then our mentors were like two of the greatest bands from their respective genres and two of the best live bands ever. And I have a photo, and I'll send it to you. I got to dig it up, but there is a photo. We were on tour with Clutch in Birmingham, UK.
Yeah. Okay.
And we played a show, and the guys from Steel Pulse came to the show to hang out and watch Clutch for the first time. And it was this moment. It was this moment of standing with Steel Pulse on the side of the stage, watching Clutch play and watching Steel Pulse be like, oh, now I understand what you guys have been. I get it now, kind of one of those moments where they're like, oh, all right. Now, not only do I see why you guys love this rock band so much, but I see where your sound comes from. It comes from us and them. And it was really surreal. And every time we played Birmingham, basically as a band, Selwyn, who's one of the founding members of the group, and Grizz, who passed away a few years ago, the founding drummer of the group, they would come and just hang out with us. And we'd be playing a shit. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. We would be playing from their perspective, we were playing very small clubs. We were playing the Flapper and the Rainbow Room and these clubs in Brum, and they're from the other side of town in Handsworth, and they would come on the other side of town to whatever tiny little damp rock and roll club we were playing. And sometimes the show would have 12 people, or sometimes the show would have 150 people. And then they got to watch us open for Clutch in front of 2,000 people. And they would come just hang out on the tour bus and hang out all night and have drinks, just tell us stories about what it was like when the Police were opening for them on tour,
Wow.
just like just craziness. And I actually haven't thought about that till this interview right now. It's just like, it's fucking surreal.
It's nice to hear about this almost like mentor in a band and close friendships, and there being no sort of rivalry or ego whatsoever. I also want to stick with the same year, 2005, because Lionize released their debut album, Danger My Dear. How do you look back at the recording and release of that album, and how was it received upon its release? And more importantly, what opportunities do you think it created?
We went into that really not knowing how to make records, and we went to what we did was we couldn't afford like real studio time. So we went to this studio. Now I'm going to forget the name of it. It was in Towson, and it was basically an old, awesome, huge recording studio that since the 70s had turned into a school. So you could get discounted rates working at the studio at night, kind of overnights or odd hours. So this guy, Jake Mossman, who I still have kind of kept in touch with to this day, great Baltimore studio engineer. We made it over the course of probably 6 months because we couldn't afford studio time, so we'd do a couple shows and then go record some stuff, and then do a couple shows and go record some stuff, spread out by weeks and months. And I don't think we even really had a fan base. I don't think anyone really cared. There was no one who really cared about it except for us. And we took it kind of as a thing where we were like, oh, that's how you make a record. Now we've printed up 1,000 copies of it. We got to go sell them. We got to go play shows. So I don't think anyone really gives a shit about the record. Even to this day, I don't think the fans that came to know us over the last, decade or so, I don't think they really cared about the record. But it is a cool record in terms of what we were trying to do. I think it's sonically, it's weird. It's a weird little mixture of some weird dub reggae stuff and some weird rock stuff. And The drummer was a guy who lasted like a year, 2 years. But yeah, it was me, Hank, and Chris with a rotating cast of drummers, you know. Yeah, the record's cool. I haven't listened to it all the way through in a long time. I don't know if I can listen to it. I didn't really know how to sing then.
I want to come back to the reggae influence, and you've already mentioned being exposed to reggae when you were working for a label when you were very young. Can you discuss the recording and release of the band's third album, Space Pope and the Glass Machine? What are your recollections of recording at Harry J Studios in Kingston, Jamaica? And can you talk about the musicians who performed on the album?
Yeah.
And also, when you look back, what are your kind of impressions of the finished work?
It's totally insane. I mean, so that record was the first time we had a sound. I think it took us probably 5 years from Danger My Dear to there, 4 years to really like get a sound, 3 years to really develop what we were trying to go for. And it was really crazy. I remember in 2008, because I think that record was 2009, right? So in 2008, New Year's Eve in Baltimore, we opened for Clutch. And I said to Tim Salt, who's their guitar player, I said, hey, would you like, okay, so let me rewind that. Basically, we had been looking to make our next record, and Sydney Mills from Steel Pulse, who was the musical director and keyboard player and band leader, he said, hey, do you want to go to Jamaica and make a record? Like, I think it would be really cool to kind of get you guys down there and isolated. And I think we could do something real crazy and for like a really good price. And I said, dude, we're like no one. Like, how can we afford that? And he's like, you'd be surprised. It's very cheap to record at Harry J's, and the biggest cost would be the flights, and you're like to your hotels. The studio time would be like nothing. I'll produce it. We'll get an engineer, and then he's like, we'll get Dean Frazier to play saxophone on it and lead a horn section. And we're like, what? And he's like, yeah, but we want to make sure it also doesn't just sound like a reggae record. We want it to sound like you. So he told us the price of it. And I think at the time it was like $12,000 all in. I mean, he's like, if you have 12,000, we'll do the flights. We'll put you guys up somewhere and we'll stay down there for a few weeks and we'll make a record, And I'm like, this is insane. So I kind of kept looking into other options. And it turns out that like to do the record the way we wanted to do it, anywhere else in the States was going to be like $15,000. So it was like $3,000, $4,000 cheaper to go down to Jamaica to make the record. So on New Year's Eve, 2008, I said to Tim Salt, hey, this is really weird, but do you want to go to Jamaica and play lead guitar on our record? We kind of want to make it as rocky as possible and also do this reggae thing. And he was like, yeah, of course I do. So he came down, we all flew down, and we made a record at Harry J's over the course of a few weeks. And it was one of the craziest experiences of my life. I mean, looking back on it now, it was just like, it was a concoction of very cheap, very strong weed, all night studio sessions, delicious food, and the vibe of Jamaica, which is, there's no place like it, So
shortly after releasing that third album, you went on to tour the US with Lee Scratch Perry as his backing band and support.
Yeah.
Can you share with us your memories of working and touring with a legend in reggae music, and what did you learn from that experience, and maybe what did you learn from him?
This is going to ruffle people's feathers sometimes when I tell what I believe is the truth of this story. Now, at the time, he was the worst person to work for. I mean, he was incredibly difficult. He was spiteful. He was vindictive. He was rude. He was late constantly. He was seemingly out of his mind.
Mm.
And I wouldn't call him a great performer. You know, he wasn't doing anything vocally or stylistically or vibe wise on stage that was cool. And he would kind of take credit for when the band was really good. He would be like, you know, it's because of me, except he didn't have one rehearsal with us. And he didn't show up to a single show on time for sound check. So I have real mixed emotions when talking about it because, and I know I'm supposed to be like, oh, he's a legend and it was legendary. It was a fucking brutal time. He flew to every show with his wife and tour manager, and we were in a van doing like 15-hour overnight drives. So 12 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours overnight, sleeping in the van. And the tour started like this and it ended like this. And I'll explain that. 2 big North American runs. And the first night we play the Key Club. It's the first. So we opened for him the year previous in Baltimore. And his wife, who's his manager, watched us perform and said to us, Lee loves your set and we'd like to reach out to you to be the backing band, and you can open as Lionize, and then you can stay on stage and Lee will come out and you do a set with Lee and you'll get paid for Lionize and you get paid for our sets and it'd be great. So we said, this is a dream come true. We get to go out on tour as Lionize, stay on stage, get paid twice, hotels are taken care of. It's great. And he's like this legendary producer, you know, he's this legendary name in reggae music. So the first show, we show up to Los Angeles. This is maybe 6 months later. We drive across the country for the first time, fully across. Show up, load in, sound check. Okay, Lee's supposed to be there for sound check, but he's not coming for sound check. Okay. They come down and show us the guest list. And it's like Benicio del Toro, Henry Rollins. It's insane. It's an A-list celebrity down the, you know, ring of musicians and actors and stuff are there to see him. They don't know who we are. And the agent comes in, the booking agent, Lee's agent, comes in the room and is hanging out with us for a little bit. And Lee walks into the room 10 minutes after we're supposed to be on stage already. We went on as Lionize already, came back off stage. Go back on stage and come back off stage. We're in the back green room getting ready to do his set. And he walks in the dressing room and he looks at us and he looks at his wife and he looks at the agent and he said, who the fuck are these guys? And his wife's like, this is the band. Like, you've hired them to do this tour. And he goes, I didn't hire these fucking guys. I don't know who these guys are. Packs his suitcase up and starts walking down Sunset. Then they had to coax him back in. And an hour later, he goes on stage an hour late and we get on stage and we shredded. I mean, we absolutely destroyed. It was a great night. And then he told everybody how, you know, he picked the band and we followed his direction. And it was just, that was a taste. That was a shape of the things to come. And countless nights he would accuse us on stage of fucking the song up or do a completely different song and not tell us, you know, like go into something completely different, stop us off cues. And so we started like, so I don't know if you know, like, his nickname is the Upsetter, you know, Lee Upsetter, Lee Scratch Perry, but they call him the Upsetter. That's his nickname. And so he's really starting to pick on us. He tells his tour manager that when we get to the dressing room, we're not to touch any of the amenities, none of the waters or beers or food or whatever. So it starts to get real crazy. So one day in Flagstaff, Arizona, this is like 6 weeks into a 12-week run. Maybe it's 8 weeks into a 12-week run. It's towards the end. But there's a solid bunch of shows left, including Reggae on the Rocks at Red Rocks in Colorado, which is a famous reggae festival. And Lee's one of the headliners. So in Flagstaff, he says to us on stage, he said, the band fucked up. They don't know what they're doing. He's telling the crowd that, he starts kind of ragging on us to the crowd. So I waited, and he's been so brutally mean to us the whole time. And we're kind of taking it because we're a young band, and we don't want to lose the tour. We don't want to lose the money. We want to do the right thing. So, and we are doing 6 to 8 hours overnight driving. No one's getting sleep. The hotel rooms start to get worse and worse as we get into the tour. And I snapped, and I kind of took the tour manager aside, taking him. That's a nice way to put it, but we went off and had a little meeting, and I basically said to him, this stops now or we'll destroy the tour. We'll just go the fuck home. I'll get in the van right now and start driving. I don't care. We're not going to put up with this anymore. And the tour manager goes, okay, I'll talk to Lee, And the next day he was super cool to us. And at the time, and I don't condone it, but at the time I thought, this guy's a fucking asshole. He's just an asshole. There's no point to this. There's no reason to treat anyone like that. And in thinking about it on his passing and in the last few years, I actually think, while I don't appreciate it I don't fully appreciate it, but I do think that was his way of teaching a young band to not take shit from anyone, including him. His attitude completely changed when we stood up to him. And not in a way where he was scared of us, but he was proud of us, So the tour concludes at Reggae on the Rocks. And this is the end of the story, but the tour concludes at Reggae on the Rocks. It's 10,000 people. It's sold out. It's part of a big festival, and Lee's one of the headliners. And of course, he's an hour late, and he's flying in, and we've already been there all day, and we're set up and sound checked and backlined. And the production manager for Reggae on the Rocks comes and says, you guys got to go on right now. We're going to introduce you as Lee Perry's band, and you'll play for 45 minutes instrumentally. Then Lee will walk out on stage, and he'll do a half-hour set, and that'll be that's it. And I thought back to the moment where we had stood up to Lee Perry, and he was what he was, kind of this fire that he put in us. And I said to the production manager, and at great risk to our career, I mean, we were no one, literally no one. And I said, you introduce us as Lionize, and we do a half-hour Lionize set to 10,000 people. We come off stage, 15-minute break, then we'll come back on as Lee Perry's band, do a dub set, and then he comes on, or we don't do it at all. And the guy said, all right, you got it. So that was my time with Lee Scratch Perry. It's not a very black and white issue. It's a very gray place for me.
It's an interesting insight, and it kind of is familiar with my musical hero, someone I've always worshipped. And in my collection behind me, I've got more CD albums by him than any other artist, is Chuck Berry. And I did an interview with a documentary filmmaker called Stephanie Bennett, who produced the Hail Hail Rock and Roll documentary to celebrate, the famous one which Keith Richards orchestrated. And that was interesting because she shared almost similar to what you've recounted with your experiences. An individual who was very bitter, who'd done time in prison, that kind of resented the industry, had been ripped off so many times by publishers, by disc jockeys, and she just said what a difficult character he was. But despite all those difficulties, you still admired them at the same time, which I found quite fascinating.
Yeah, that's very. That would be the conclusion.
We'll move from working with someone that you said was difficult, I guess, heavily egotistical and so on. We'll move from those difficulties, and we'll talk about a band that you've got huge admiration for, close allies with, and that's Clutch, who you've mentioned many times in the interview. Yep. And you've collaborated with pretty much the whole band: guitarist Tim Salt, vocalist Neil Fallon, the drummer Jean-Paul Gaster as well, and you've also signed to their music label as well. How were you first introduced to the band? Can you discuss your collaborations together and opening for them? And what do you think affiliates the two bands, and why you've become so close and have this huge respect for one another professionally and also personally as well?
I actually first met Neil when I was 7 years old. His first job was at my dad's seafood store. So this very cosmic relationship began then. He would kind of look after me when I was in the store. You know, my dad was off doing something and he'd be babysitting or taking me to get a slice of pizza at the mall, or, you know, he was 16. And basically, I have been a Clutch fan since I was really getting into music at 13. My dad would be like, oh, you know, this guy used to watch you at the store. You know, it's this guy, Neil Fallon. He is in a great band called Clutch. You know, they're a cool band. And so from 12, 13, I got super into it. It connected with me in a way where all the stuff that I kind of liked, which was heavy punk stuff, Sabbath, classic rock, Bad Brains, that was them, you know? And some years later, there was this guy, Walter Salb. He was a very famous drum teacher in the area in Maryland. And Jean-Paul Gaster, the drummer from Clutch, was taking lessons from him. And our drummer in Lionize at the time was taking lessons from him. And he was that kind of drum teacher that was a jazz guy, and he would just invite the whole band over to hang out and watch the drum lesson and then talk about piano stuff. An incredible character, very crass guy, very old school. He drummed for Sinatra and he drummed for Aretha Franklin, and he was like an incredible, you know, guy. And then he started mentoring other drummers in the area, and he was the real deal. And Jean-Paul Gaster from Clutch is probably, in my opinion, he's my favorite drummer for sure. But in terms of drummers, he's in the top. He's number one for me, but he's in the top 3 in the world. I mean, he's up there with Braun from Mastodon. He is, you know, there's only a few drummers, especially in rock music, that he's the best rock and roll drummer for sure. Heavy metal gets into a different kind of category in terms of technicality and stuff, but he's the best. He's one of the best musicians that I've ever known. Super cool guy. So we started hanging out with him at Walters, and that kind of led to him being like, hey, I like he really likes reggae. He was like, I like dub reggae and the Bad Brains, and why don't you come open? The first show we ever opened was for the Bakerton Group, which was in 2006. It's a Clutch side project featuring the members of Clutch, but it's all instrumental. And it's actually incredible music. But they invited us to open for them, and you know, I guess we weren't totally douchebags, so they gave us, right after that, they gave us a 7-day small run. That was in 2007, maybe. They gave us a small run in the U.S. of 5 or 6 shows. And then the next year, they gave us a full U.S. tour. And the next year, they gave us 2 full U.S. tours, including Canada. And then a couple years later, they brought us over to Europe for the first time. They brought us to UK for the first time. And they've continued to support my musical career into this new iteration of my solo career. And just this past April and May, I did a 30-day tour with them across the States, and it was incredible. And it's been really awesome to watch them grow too. The first time we went to the UK with them, we opened for them at the Forum in Kentish Town in London. So 1,500, 1,200 cap. Then the next time we opened for them in London, it was at a sold out Roundhouse show at 3,000 plus tickets. And then the next year or 2 years later, they went back and packed out Brixton. So it's been really surreal to watch them grow when I've always thought they were the biggest band in the world, and somehow they just keep getting bigger. So
Shortly, I want to move on to your solo career. But before I do so, I just wanted to ask you, Lionize have recorded 7 albums and EP releases as well. Which work are you most proud of and why? And are there any recordings that you're not particularly happy with? And if so, why?
I think every record you do has something that you would probably want to change. So I don't think about it like that. I just try to look at it like it's a moment in time, and that's what we were going for at that time. So it seems kind of silly to look at things in terms of like what you would do differently, I guess, or what you would change. But I think the 2 records I'm most proud of, I have to say, are Nuclear Soul, the last 2 records, which is Nuclear Soul and Panic Attack. Nuclear Soul, I think we really started to grow songwriting wise. I think we started to branch out more from a thing that felt more like a formula. It became formulaic just to be like, this is the song that's the dub reggae thing, and this is the riff part. And we started to really write songs. And then I think actually, John Paul played drums on the last Lionize record on Panic Attack. And that's our most, we've had a bunch of different drummers in the past, and that album is the most full version of what Lionize was. The songs are incredible. It's had over 1 million plays total. People seem to really connect with it and like it. And that's the one I think I'm the most proud of.
I want to turn the clock back to around about 2 years, but it's difficult to kind of track time because the last 2 years have been so, bizarre, I guess, with what happened. But if we go back to your experiences during the global pandemic, you were stuck overseas, away from collaborators, away from a studio, and of course your family. What made you decide to reach for your guitar, start writing songs and recording them on your phone?
Well, I think it kind of started at the end of 2019, and I don't really need to get into details, but it started to feel like Lionize was gonna take a break or not be at the forefront of everyone's mind for the foreseeable future. And so I had already started writing songs that I thought would be for the next Lionize record, some iterations of them. And so I already had it in my mind that I was going to take some of these new songs and develop them into my own songs and go try to do a tour in the UK. I got invited to do a tour as a solo as Nate Bergman, an acoustic tour opening for Dan Reed and Danny Vaughan through the UK and Sweden. It started in Sweden. And I was basically playing acoustic Lionize songs and a couple new ones that I wrote, that I started dabbling in. And I got back. I did 3 days in Sweden. They went amazingly. And part of the trip was to, I had kind of gotten to the point, I think, in my head where I'm like, do I still want to do this? Like, is music what I do? Like, do I still want to do this? Do I want to do Lionize? Do I want to do my own thing? I don't know. I don't know. Everything felt like it had run its course in a way, and I didn't know what that meant for me. So the tour in the UK, I basically rented this tiny little Toyota minivan from a company called Bumblebee Campers in Manchester. And it's like a no frills. There's like the back seat folds down into a bed. And I said, fuck it. I'm just going to drive myself around the UK. I'm going to sleep in car parks. I'm going to sleep in travels and services, bring an acoustic guitar. And when this is done, if I still like it, then I know I'm on the right path, And on March 10th, I got back from Sweden on the 9th. On the 10th, I think I got a phone call that my manager at the time had passed away unexpectedly, not COVID related. A good friend of mine, my manager for 6 years, he passed away unexpectedly. And then literally the next day on my way to London to play my first debut London show, whole tour's canceled, world shut down, all the flights are grounded, you're stuck in Manchester, and I was in a travel lodge in Center City near Piccadilly. And I was just kind of sitting there watching TV and just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, will I go home soon? All the flights were being canceled. I mean, it was insane. And I said, I was just kind of watching TV, and I mean, not to make it dramatic, I just like went over to the window and I was looking out the window and I was like, you're right. This is what you do. You write songs. You're a songwriter. So what does this mean? What is this? What does it feel like to be in this place that you are right now? And I just started writing Ode to Manchester. And leading up to being at that travel lodge, the musicians in Manchester and the arts community had kind of heard that everything kind of fell out from under me, and people were like reaching out and sending me money and inviting me to play open mic nights and feeding me and inviting me into their homes. And I just had realized what a special place, even though that the world was kind of coming to an end, like I was in this really special place, and it kind of like where I was supposed to be in a weird way, in some weird cosmic way. I felt like I was put there. So the song kind of poured out of me. And then the songs that I had been working on to make into more songs, it just started. I finished them all. And I basically got back with an entire record, which was Metaphysical Change.
I want to talk about the album. I've been listening to it this morning. I played it many times, and Ode to Manchester I played about 100 times. I think it's an incredible song.
Thanks.
Can you talk about the collaborators who actually helped to put the album together, and then eventually the label behind it? And what made you decide to write songs that are partly inspired by country, by blues and rock, and kind of infuse them all?
So on Manchester specifically, I had gone to see this artist. I was playing before I left before the whole shutdown on the 1st or 2nd of March. I played a venue, a little thing in Manchester called the Whiskey Jar, which is actually this really highly curated artist series they do at this bar in the Northern Quarter called the Whiskey Jar. And basically they have artists from all over the world and from all over Manchester, the cream of the crop, the best of the best, come in and work out a few songs or new songs or warm up for a tour or whatever. They just do a couple songs and 10 artists for the night. And this artist came and she blew me away. She came in with a full of a string quartet and her on acoustic guitar. Her name is Chloe Foy. She's an incredible folk singer from Manchester. And she was warming up for a tour that she was starting. And 2 nights later, she was playing, or a week later, she was playing at the King's Cross, another venue in Manchester. And this is when everything was starting to shut down, but this show was still happening. So I went to see her. I was all alone. I went to see her, and the show was sold out. It was magic. And the guy who was leading her string quartet and doing backup vocals and stuff and playing some other instruments, I went up to him after the set and I said, man, his name is Harry Fausting Smith. And I said, you're incredible, man. The arrangements were just so beautiful. Like, it brought me to tears a couple times. And do you know anyone who's got a studio in town? I wrote this song yesterday, and I think it'd be real cool if we could get some musicians together. And he goes, I don't know, man. Like, I'll call and ask around, but he's like, things are shutting down, you know? So he called his mate, Adam Gorman, at Pinhole Sound. And Adam was like, yeah, if it's just the 3 of us in the studio, we don't really know the protocols for anything yet. This is very early on. He said, come in. And it turns out that Harry plays drums, bass, guitar, keys, horns, strings. He does it all. So it was me and Harry as the band, and Adam Gorman is the engineer. And we recorded and arranged that song in one day. It was done. The final product was done when I left that afternoon.
I'm going to skip forward in the timeline slightly and ask about your impressions of the album from the songwriter's point of view. But first of all, I wanted to ask you, how long were you stranded in the UK for,
few
away
weeks.
from your family? Yeah.
Yeah, a few weeks of not knowing when I was going to fly back, or, you know, and Trump was the president, so it didn't fucking help anything. And, you know, I got the last flight out of Dublin, literally the last flight that Aer Lingus was servicing. There was 20 people on it, on a 300 passenger plane. So.
And were you I presume you were in regular contact with your family?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, I wasn't
via phone and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't stranded, you know, my parents, I was in touch with my parents and friends. And yeah, I mean, yeah, with the internet, it's kind of like people were kind of following the journey of me being stuck. So I wasn't abandoned. I wasn't isolated, but I never really felt alone because of the people in Manchester, you know. I really fell in love with it. So
I wanted to ask you the impressions of your first solo album away from being in a band, about the finished album. First of all, your impressions of it, and how's it been received by your fan base, and what are your future musical plans and endeavors? And would you like to do anything maybe creatively outside of music?
my impression of the record is that it's the best piece of art that I've done. You know, it's fully me. It's no influence. Aside from I have some amazing guest musicians play on the record. I mean, Frank Iero from My Chemical Romance, Tyler Bryant, Tucker Rule from Thursday, Travis Stever from Coheed and Cambria, Britt Turner from Blackberry Smoke, Karina Reichman, Mike Ward from Ben Harper and the Wallflowers. Yeah, I mean, the record's insane. It's like, and I still don't think people know about it completely yet. So I think it's going to be one of these things. I just finished writing another record, and I think the next record's even better. So I think when people discover this next record, they'll go back and hear that and be like, all right, like, you know, I'm really proud of it as my first record as a solo artist, as me. I don't think I could have done a much better job. So
you should be proud of it, because it's an excellent album. I was really blown away by it. It was like one of the best new albums I'd heard for like a long time. And I was straight away with my kind of music friends. I was like, you need to listen to this album. This is great. And it kind of, I don't like to compare, because I know artists don't necessarily like it when people make comparisons, but I could kind of hear this Steve Earle thing, very sincere, honest lyrics
Sure.
that were heartfelt. And I'm a huge Steve Earle fan.
I
And
love
yeah,
Steve Earle. If you're going to compare me to anybody, at least it's Steve Earle, you know?
and I just thought the songs were incredible, and the musicianship as well. They're just great musicians on there, you know, great percussion. I thought the steel on the Ode to Manchester song worked perfectly. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Just
for me, it's really, if people don't like it, then that's cool. I accept that because it's fully me. But when people do like it, it's like I wrote and arranged every single note on the record. So I'm really proud of it in terms of um, knowing that when people do like it, it wasn't anyone else. You know, this is my heart that you're seeing, you know? So it's very vulnerable. It's a very vulnerable place to be because, you know, if they don't like it, it's kind of like they don't like a part of you, you know what I mean? But so far it's been really well received and it's growing by the day. And I think early next year, we're going to see a UK release specifically for it with a bonus track. So
it was interesting because at the beginning of this discussion, you said you weren't necessarily from a musical family, but you mentioned about being exposed to so many genres, styles of music
yeah,
that were so iconic and pivotal to America's history of
yeah,
music. And what's interesting is you've done so many different things. We touched upon reggae, your new album, which is inspired by country music, blues, and rock again. It's interesting. Do you want to kind of, for the next album, just do something completely different again? It's interesting that as an artist, you're not this kind of, I don't want to kind of be rude and give the expression, but some artists kind of get pigeonholed and become one-trick ponies. I think
sure.
it's fascinating that you kind of want to do something different album to album. I'm interested to kind of hear
Yeah.
more.
The next album grows. It takes it takes metaphysical change as a starting point, and it kind of digs its heels in further to being weirder and to exploring more, you know? And the thing is, when I think about bands that I really love, my first concert, it makes a lot of sense to me. My first concert, I was 9 years old. In 1992, my mom took me to, or maybe 92 or 94, but she took me to see the Rolling Stones Voodoo Lounge tour at RFK Stadium. And that was the biggest tour of their career, even I think up until now. I mean, it was massive. And when I think about the Rolling Stones, who are a massive influence on me, or Van Morrison, or the Beatles, or Led Zeppelin, or Black Sabbath, and specifically UK bands for sure. But the Black Crowes and Clutch and Creedence Clearwater and Otis Redding, and I go down the list forever, right? None of that stuff is singular. None of those bands are one thing. I mean, Sticky Fingers is like a country blues rock folk rec. I mean, it's like it's from another planet. Like there is nothing that sounds like that. And they're the biggest band in the world. So like, why would you want to be defined by one thing? And if you talk about Steve Earle, and it's like his biggest song arguably is Rattlesnake Road or, Galway Girl. And it's like, one's a Texas blues road song and one's essentially an Irish jig. I mean, I don't like, one's like an Irish folk love story and one's a Texas like, why does he have to be one thing or the other? An artist should be allowed. All great artists are of many things, and I don't think I have a desire to direct movies or be an actor or produce even other people's records or whatever. I really, really, really just want to sing and play and record my own stuff until I Can no longer do it.
Who doesn't love the Rolling Stones? I was chatting with a friend today about the Stones, and they kind of started off as a blues band, but you're right, they've just done so much from country. They even had to go a little bit of reggae. Incredibly,
we'll forgive them for the disco. We'll forgive them for the disco.
And incredibly, like with some girls, post-punk, they did that kind of new wave thing as well, didn't they?
Sure.
That was an excellent album. But you're right, they've just done so much, and yeah, and they've always kind of stuck to their roots as well. They've always been passionate about that music that inspired them as well, the blues particularly, and of course the rock and roll stuff. They were hugely influenced by Chuck Berry, weren't they? And
I mean, the thing is, I always think back to something that John Paul from Clutch told me. He's like, dude, you can play any kind of music you want because it's going to be you playing it, you know? When your band does a country song, it doesn't sound like a country band. It sounds like your band, you know? I'm always going to be me. So when you hear me do my version of a country song, you don't go, man, this sounds like Tim McGraw. It sounds like me doing my thing. And I think that's always stuck with me. Like, you shouldn't be afraid to experiment because it's always going to be like you. And if you're not growing, you're dying, right? Like the opposite of growth is death. So I think artistically speaking, there is only one band truly in the history of music that gets to slide, that doesn't have to partake in this rule. And that, of course, is AC/DC and Motorhead. We don't want them to do different. We want them to do that. But no one else does it as good as that. So if I fill stadiums doing a certain thing, I'll also probably continue just to do that.
Nathan, one last question, and then we move on to the your take questions that we ask all guests, the same 13 quick fire questions.
Yep.
Let's go away outside of music.
Okay.
What are your interests and hobbies? And how do your family look at your career? And what are their thoughts on you as a songwriter, in the band as Lionize and also as a solo artist? How do they kind of look at your creative output?
I don't really have a lot of interests outside of music. I mean, I would tell you I like to watch documentaries, which I do, but also they're usually music related. You know, I mean, the occasional I like good cinema. I like good TV shows. I like a good book if it's a good book. I like art. I like art in general. So I like food. I like great cooking. I like anything that's a craft to somebody. That's, I think, what my interests are. So if you're like great at woodworking, that's interesting to me. You know what I mean? Or if you're great at, I don't know, you're like a beer brewer, you brew beer or you make wine. I think the process and all that stuff is really interesting to me, but essentially it all just relates back to art and music for me. So I don't have a whole lot of interest outside of music.
And your family, your wife, is she musical? And how does she?
I don't have one.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, sure.
Yeah. And my parents are into art and music. My dad, a little bit of sports, but he reads a lot of books about the Civil War now. So
Nathan Bergman, we come on to that time where we ask.
I'm ready.
Yeah. And some of these interests you've mentioned already, particularly creative ones. Here we go. Number one, what would you say is your favorite pastime?
And it can't be musical?
It can be musical. Yeah, of course.
I love writing songs.
I knew you were going to say songwriting.
I know that's so fucked up. Okay. But if I wasn't going to say that, I would say, trying new food.
You just mentioned a love of cinema. But
Yeah.
if you had to pick your favorite film, what would it be and why? Or you could choose a few.
No, I would say my maybe my all-time favorite movie ever is Pulp Fiction. I think that's like the peak. It's peak movie making for me.
I still think that's Tarantino's best film by a long, long way.
Yeah, it's really, really, really good. I mean, it's really good. The music's incredible in it. The story's great. Um, I love The Fifth Element. I love sci-fi. So that's a tough one for me to beat. I'm not a Star Wars or Lord of the Rings like movie fanatic. So
From Pulp Fiction now to novels, who would you say is your favorite novelist?
it's between two. It's Cormac McCarthy. I think Blood Meridian is probably the best book I've ever read. Next to this, another author named Sam Talent. He wrote a book called Running the Light, which I think is one of the best novels that's been written in probably the last 20 years.
This might be a difficult one because you said you're so much in love with music and you love creating and songwriting. But if you had to choose a different profession, what would it have been?
Shit. Chef.
Yeah, you mentioned an interesting cookery. Yeah.
Yeah. Why not?
Inspirations next, but who would you cite as the greatest inspiration in your life?
Probably my parents.
They've
Yeah.
always been supportive of what you've
Yeah.
always wanted to do in life.
To their own detriment. Yes. 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 Very much. Yeah.
We go from inspirations next to newspapers. Do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
I'm more of a Reddit guy, and on the homepage of Reddit, I have The Guardian. I pretty much go for UK press if I'm gonna read. I think American press is so bought and sold at this point, it's fucked. But I try to get on Reddit and get kind of a scope of a bunch of different sources so I can kind of form my own opinion. I don't know how much of it's real or not real at this point anymore. So
It's interesting because we've done probably about 90 interviews now, and most people's choice has always been The Guardian. It seems to be quite a common theme. And yeah, I agree with you. I think The Guardian's a good paper, and it's particularly geared towards anyone who's interested in like the arts, creativity.
I mean, it used to be Huffington Post, I think, when it first started, but like everything else, it gets infiltrated by corporate interests. And then all of a sudden you're reading an article about why gas companies are good or how fracking is a good thing. And you're like, this is not good. So
Back onto food, cuisine. What would you say is your favorite food?
Greek,
Yeah. Any particular recipe or?
hands down Greek food. Oh man, just all of it.
Yeah. Next one, we get
Yeah.
our guests next to choose their favorite cultural icon. Could be someone from history, could be somebody musical, it could be maybe a political figure. Who would you cite as your favorite cultural icon?
It won't be political, I can tell you that. That's tough, man. I love two schools of thought. I mean, I really, really love Sam Cooke in terms of who he was as a person, in terms of business and music and what he did for the music industry and what he did for music in general. Without him, there would be no like popular music essentially. He really paved the way forward. I don't know though. It's tough. Maybe Marcus Aurelius or Socrates. I don't know. Maybe a ancient Greek philosopher.
Sam Cooke's an interesting choice. Love him as
Yeah.
a singer because he kind of crossed between soul and rock and
Right.
roll.
Right.
Yeah, and I think he was involved in the civil rights movement as well. I might
Big
be
time.
wrong there.
No,
Yeah.
big time. And he was essentially the first artist to own his own publishing and own the rights to his music. And a lot of people theorized that the mob had him killed essentially because he had such a hold on his catalog, and they really wanted the rights, and he was selling so many records at the time. So
we go from Sam Cooke as a favorite cultural icon to favorite curse word. What would you choose?
oh God, can I really do it?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Cunt by far is the best. There's no better curse word, and especially when you're in the UK and it becomes a verb, and it's like something, that cunting car it's an adjective, it's a verb, cunt is the best.
In a band and as a solo
Have a lot of other people said that, by the way?
Yeah, one other, I think.
Okay,
Yeah, has
okay.
been yeah.
Okay. My mom's gonna kill me.
As a band and as a solo musician, you've toured the world, you've seen many places, but what would you say is your favorite place or holiday destination?
Greece.
Yeah, any particular part?
The island of Icaria.
This
Magical.
this is the question you never want to ask a musician.
Yeah.
But who is your favorite music artist and what's your favorite album?
It's really tough. I mean, if we went by genre, I could do it rapid fire, you know what I mean? But if I had to pick one record to go with me forever, I'd pick Bob Marley's Uprising.
And the last two, Nathan Bergman, what would you say is your greatest achievement to date?
Not dying.
And then finally, how do you wish to be remembered?
As a singer-songwriter.
Lovely way to finish. Thanks for joining me for the last 80 minutes. I think you've got a new converted fan, and I
appreciate that so much.
I'm really interested to see and hear what you do next. And I hope one day you'll be coming to the UK.
Where are you in the UK?
I'm based in the southwest in a city called Bristol.
Of course. Yeah, the Thekla.
Yeah, not far. That's literally, I could get in the car now. I could get there probably in 10 minutes.
I will and then I can promise you within the next year, I will be there and we'll have you on the guest list for sure.
You don't have to put me on the guest list because I always like to,
Okay, buy a ticket.
Because I believe
you don't have to argue with me. That's fine.
I didn't say that to have some credibility in saying that, but yeah. But the new album is fascinating. It really is a great album.
Thank you.
And Peter Strobel was we interviewed, that was about 3 interviews ago, and he spoke really highly about working with you and, as, somebody to watch out for in the music business. And he said, you'll have a fascinating interview with Nathan. And it really has been really interesting.
Okay, cool. I'm glad I didn't disappoint you or Pete, but I can tell you disappointing Pete would be a lot worse. The wrath of that, I can't even imagine. What was his favorite cuss word?
I can't remember.
Asshole? Was it asshole?
It's on the channel. I would need to, yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go back and watch it. Yeah.
Thanks for your honesty, your openness.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. And for people that want to find out more, listen to more of your music, see you live, buy the new album, where do they go?
Nate Bergman Sings. If you put that into Google, all of it comes up.
I wish you all the best for you.
Thank you so much for everything. This was awesome. Let's do it again soon.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for being a guest on Your Take.
Cheers.